If somebody were
Yeah,
to
dude.
ask you, who you are, bar, coffee shop, whatever, somebody asks you that, what would you say the answer to it is?
Usually I respond with just saying I'm a podcaster. Usually, keeps the conversation going in that direction, which I would like to make that more of who I am anyway. So it kind
Hmm.
of works out. It's just like, it's silly to kind of try to go into everything that you do when somebody asks you that question, because it's more like somebody's trying to be polite. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
usually if
typically,
somebody
but
asks me, I'm just like, yeah, I'm a podcaster.
okay, okay. Well, how about somebody who's not being polite and they genuinely want to know, what do you do, man? What do you podcast about? Let's get into it a little bit.
Yeah. So I have been podcasting about relationships, networking, and entrepreneurship for almost 7 years. I have a podcast agency and software company that helps podcasters book better guests and helps guests get booked on better podcasts. We've also done a ton of courses and coaching and trainings on podcasting over that same time period. And yeah, mainly everything centered around podcasting, podcast marketing, a little bit of sales here and there because I have a door-to-door sales background. But yeah, that's like the core of what I do: podcast guest and show bookings, and then running my own podcast.
Oh, right on, dude. There might be a synergy between us because I developed an AI that gets me podcast guests and a couple of buddies of mine podcast guests automatically without having
Oh,
to
dope.
do a damn thing. Yeah. It customizes individualized messaging and then sends them out and follows up automatically without having
Nice.
to do any research or connecting yourself. So it's pretty
Where
badass.
what platforms do you reach out on?
It's through email. It does the research through all the social media platforms, takes all that data, and then formulates custom message outreaches, and then sends them out automatically. And
Okay. Is
follows
that
up.
how we connected?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
exactly how we
Great.
connect. Yeah, man. So
Great.
it's badass, and you didn't know it was AI, which is always interesting. And so there's
Yeah, for podcast appearances specifically, it's usually my team that handles all those requests. So I likely just sent it off to them. But yeah, I'll grade it for you if you want, bro. I'll let you know.
all right, cool, man. Yeah, we'll talk about it. We got the TV doing something in the back again.
Yeah, it's because I pulled my phone out to look up your original email because now I'm curious to see what it says.
Yeah, we can take a look at it
Um,
afterwards. It's interesting. We can walk through it and it's adjustable. It's a sweet software. But anyways, we can talk about that after. What I'm curious about
all right.
is, what are the benefits of starting a podcast? What are the typical reasons that somebody would want to do that?
Yeah, typical reasons to start a podcast, man. I mean, when, basically, whenever anybody asks me like why they should have a podcast, it always goes back to their goals. It's always like, oh, I don't know what do you want to do? You know what I mean? Do you want to be a full-time podcaster? You want to just sell sponsorships and talk about politics or talk comedy or talk sports or religion or spirituality or philosophy or business or whatever, and you just want to get paid sponsorships? Because that's a whole different reason to get started and a whole different strategy to get started. Do you want more credibility for your business? Do you want more leads or sales? Do you want, like, what all do you want to happen with having a show? And then how do we design it that way in order to make you have it? So if you don't have an answer for that and you're wondering like, oh, well, why should I? I've never thought about starting a show and I don't want to be a full-time podcaster. Why should I have one? So for me, I can just speak to the benefits of having one that I've experienced. Um, First off is knowledge. It's the best accountability partner for increasing your knowledge around a certain topic, whatever your niche is. So the best accountability partner, because if you are taking it seriously anyway, you obviously want to be providing the best, most up to date, accurate information that you can to your audience. So like when I started my show, it was called Build Your Network. Now it's called Travis Makes Friends. I knew nothing about like networking and relationships and all that kind of stuff. That was the reason I started the show. I started the show because I wanted to interview people and ask them about it. So
Uh,
not only did I get to ask people about it, but I also got to sharpen the skill of getting to know people and getting to know how to get to know people through doing the practice of having the show itself. So it taught me the skill of doing it because I was able to practice that skill, but it also taught me a lot of information and knowledge about that skill because I got to ask people who were really good at it all the time about you know, um, uh, their expertise behind that topic. Plus, like I said before, because I was because I was podcasting about that topic, I wanted to know as much as I could about it so that I didn't sound like a dummy when I was interviewing these people and having these conversations, so that I could translate that information back to my audience in a way that actually was digestible, made sense, and helped
Mm.
them advance in their careers and whatever. So I started reading and digesting as much as I could about that topic. I don't think that I would have done near as much studying, especially not as in depth as I did, and probably not as like complete as I did, if I were not trying to make sure that I just was providing the best value that I could to the people who were actually giving me the time of day to listen to my show. Like, it's so cool that you can just start a show and people
Yeah.
will actually listen to it. It's wild to me. It's like, you know, they can not only listen to any other podcast on the face of the planet, they could be watching anything on Netflix, on Amazon Prime, on Hulu, on Apple TV, on HBO Max. Like, there's a lot of high quality programming that's out there that's all vying for the same attention. So the fact that somebody's actually listening to me talk in a room in my house, like, that's awesome. And you should treat that like the responsibility that it is, or you're never going to grow an audience anyway. So knowledge was the first piece that I just didn't like. When I was starting my show, I didn't expect it, but over time, it was just so obvious to realize it. And in fact, I read this book recently called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia. He's um, a health and longevity expert. He's a Stanford and Johns Hopkins educated cancer surgeon. And in the acknowledgments of his book, he has this whole little thing that he wrote up about how important his podcast was. And I wrote it down as soon as, because I was listening to it at the gym. And as soon as I heard it, I had to like stop it and pause it and like write this whole like little section down, because he was basically just crediting the podcast. He said like there's nothing that's forced him and his team to learn at a faster pace,
Mm.
and that a large amount of what you just heard. So the whole book that he just wrote, Outlive, was informed by the guests and interviews and conversations that he had on his podcast. And I was like, man, if somebody who is as formally educated
Yeah.
as this person is
Hmm.
is still sitting here being like, yeah, you should have a podcast because you can learn a lot from it. It was just like, well, that makes me feel confirmed that this is one of the reasons that I have my show. You know what I mean? Because it's not just for dummies like me to learn more stuff. It's for geniuses like him to learn more stuff too. So it's probably fits for everybody in between that range as well. So knowledge was the first thing. Sharpening the skill of communication, I
Yeah.
would say, is another huge reason to have a show. In my opinion, and you talked about AI earlier, with the advancement of AI, I think in the next decade, 2 decades, a lot of jobs are going to come down to the things that AI currently can't replace, which is like emotional intelligence, in-person persuasion, communication skills, leadership, like things like that. Like in terms of writing and the actual like the lever pulling of jobs, a lot of that's going to be outsourced to AI. I don't see anything soon anyway, being able to take place of like sitting down and reading a person emote, like learning how to translate body language, learning how to digest somebody else's emotions and have that affect the way that you're communicating with them. High level influence, persuasion, leadership, all those types of like those soft skills, those are going to be extremely more valuable. The more AI takes over those like certain lever pulling tasks. So being on a show like this where you are forced again to, because you remain accountable to your audience. If you say you're going to release once a week, you're either a liar or you're going to release once a week. So, for those that continue the release schedule going, you're having that many conversations with people. I was doing 3 interviews a week when I first started. So I went from knowing 0 people in the business world to at least 150 by the time I was done with my first year, right? Like 3 a week for a full year, it's about 150. So I at least knew 150 people, but that actually multiplied itself pretty significantly because people started making introductions and all that kind of stuff. But again, it was the accountability to continue creating. And then when I first started, man, I didn't know how to formulate an interview. I was terrible. I was not a good conversationalist. It was difficult for me to go from question to question, can have a continuous thought pattern throughout the conversation to drive a certain point home. I didn't understand or know any of those things. And so like crafting communication skills in a live format like this, to learn how to ask better questions, to learn how to have better conversations, to learn how to increase your empathy and try to see somebody else's side of the story, and then have your audience also see that side. Like there's a lot of these like these soft skills that you're honing in the more you have these conversations with people. So communication skills was another one. Audience building is an obvious one. That's like the thing that most people think of when they think of having a podcast. But like, it takes a long time to build an audience. But also, if I fast forwarded my life in 15 years, I still think it's worth it to put in the work to have an audience in 15 years. Having an audience is a built-in distribution system for anything you want to build ever in the future. You know what I mean? That's why you have, Logan Paul and KSI being worth like they both have a 10-figure net worth now just because of Prime. Prime did $250 million year one in an extremely competitive sports beverage market that has had zero disruption since Gatorade, since I was like 2. You know what I mean? Like and really, I mean, Gatorade's been around a lot longer than that. Like they were able to come into that space, not only just like be there, but to dominate. $250 million year one. Next year they did a multiple of that. They spend $0 in advertising.
Yeah.
They spend on brand deals. They do like, but they were able to spend so much more on brand deals because under their advertising and marketing line item in their P&L, it's zero. It's a big goose egg. They don't have to spend any money on that because they have immediate distribution with their entire audience that they've built, KSI and Logan Paul, over the last decade of putting out content. So when they were able to do that, they were able to launch a company in a crazy competitive space that's really like not super different from a lot of the other stuff that's out there, and it exploded. Same with The Rock and Terramana Tequila. The most successful launch of a spirits company of any spirits company in all history. Sold 300,000 cases year one, which for context, George Clooney's company Casamigos, he sold it for over $1 billion when it sold like 70 or 80,000 cases the year before. So we're talking like a 4 or 5x number of cases of tequila that The Rock sold first year, where George Clooney sold his company for $1 billion at 1/5 of that volume. So like all these people, man, like they're learning this at a really high degree and they're implementing it in their life at a really high degree. And they're figuring out that like, oh, audience is worth a lot more than anything else that I could do, because if I put something out, I have this immediate attraction and attention. And of course you have to build good products. If your product sucks, then it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So a good example of that would be Beast Burger. One of Mr. Beast's ventures that didn't end up working out. His Feastables, the chocolate bar, worked out, and pretty much anything else Mr. Beast has ever done has worked out. But Mr. Beast Burger didn't work out because the product, they had some issues with the product delivery side. The ghost kitchens weren't keeping up with the demand. There was too many sales coming in and not enough quality control. And so that business ended up not doing well. So you still have to build a good product. You still have to have good partners and good distribution and all those things. Like you still have to have all of that. But again, you're subtracting the like most difficult part of starting a business, which is like finding customers who care about your product or service, because you have the audience. So audience is another huge reason. But probably the number one thing, I save this one for last because it's the thing that I think is the most underrated reason to have a podcast, and the reason why I would suggest everybody listening, if you care about your career, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to make more money, or be more well connected, the number one reason to have a show is just the relationships that you can create by having the show. It's the foot in the door, man. It takes you places that you cannot venture by yourself. And I don't know how I'd be sitting, like, I've been blessed to have conversations with like heroes of mine, like people that I've looked up to since I was 7 years old, like Shaquille O'Neal, that I was able to have a conversation with on my show. Billionaires, athletes, celebrities, comedians I find hilarious, authors whose books have made a tremendous impact on my life or the way that I see the world. I've had conversations with all of those people, almost like over 900 episodes. Zero chance any of them would have ever had a conversation with me outside of those things. And frankly, I don't know what I would have had the conversation about. You know what I mean? I didn't have an excuse to connect. There was no Trojan horse for me to find my way past their gatekeepers.
Trojan horse. That's a funny way of looking at it. I like that. Look at it as a Trojan horse, man, because it gets you in the door. It's kind of an indirect way to do it in a way that's mutually beneficial. You're providing value, you're introducing them to an audience. But what I think the biggest value in getting somebody on your podcast is for them is the opportunity to talk about what they love, what they get to do on a day-to-day basis, but never get to talk about it because everybody around them's heard it all. They've heard this spiel 100 times. And so giving them the opportunity to share that in a way that's, exploratory and potentially fun and engaging, right? So
Absolutely.
there's really some value in just the ability to have somebody share. And like, you tell me, man, what have been some of the results of the connections that you've made over the last 7 years? Like things that you didn't
Oh, dude.
expect to ever happen. And then you were like, holy fuck, like that was because of the podcast. Give me some.
I mean, my entire life is built off of the back of my podcast at this point. Like my business that pays me, like it's all in the podcasting industry. Wouldn't have it without my podcast.
Huh.
I raised over $1 million to start a software company. The way that I raised that money was through, first of all, I didn't know how to raise the money. I didn't know what vehicle, like how to put the paperwork together, how to even begin down that path. But I had several people who had been on my show who had exited companies for hundreds of millions or $1 billion+,
Yeah.
and they jumped on calls with me for free. I probably jumped on 25 or 30 calls with people who would charge thousands of dollars an hour for consulting, and they've all done it for me for free because I've made genuine friendships with these people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like the money that I've raised, the money that I make currently, a lot of my friendships that I have, my professional relationships for sure wouldn't be there without that. I've been able to speak on stages in Australia, in Puerto Rico. All of that stuff has stemmed from having the podcast, for the podcast existing. So I mean, like what hasn't come
Wow.
from the podcast in my life? You know what I mean? Would probably be a better question because there's so many things.
Yeah, dude. And you say friendships, which is interesting because, that involves more than just an initial connection and then
Correct.
potentially business connections and opportunities moving forward. You're talking about, making friends with people. How do you
Yeah.
maintain the relationships? Let's say you interview somebody and there's a connection, you guys get on and, there's some opportunity to move things forward commerce wise, but then also you're facilitating the friendship. What are your ways to
Yeah.
actually keep in touch with folks?
Well, I think all relationships are based on value.
Yeah.
Every relationship is based on value. Even the ones that you don't think are based on value, right? It's like I have friends that I've known since I was 3 years old. Like they're more like brothers than friends to me. We don't have like I don't get value in like the way that we think about it in business or entrepreneurship, but I get value from like unplugging from my life. I get value from just hanging out, playing video games and drinking beer and eating pizza like I'm in high school again. Like I get value from the entertainment that they provide, from the love that I feel from them, from
Yeah.
like there's value there. That's what relationships are. There's reciprocal value in these relationships. And so the first thing that I would say is if you have a podcast, you have to detach yourself from the potential outcome of a friendship. So what I tell people all the time is
Very
like
important.
masterminds, podcasting, all this stuff, like it gets your foot in the door and it gives you the ability to potentially create a friendship, but that's not how friendship works. You don't just like interview somebody and now you're like, homies the next day. It takes time. It takes trust, it takes communication, and it takes some sort of value exchange. So, especially for people that like I felt like we had a good, because like sometimes you have the conversation, it's just like, this is a cool conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to come on my show, but like I don't think that we're gonna, you know, um,
What you got going on back there? Imagine you guys have big titties on the
just
screen.
just what?
That would be fucking hilarious. Mid sentence.
No,
Oh
I
god.
changed it. I changed it
That was
before
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You minimized
yeah.
it.
Yeah. um, so yeah, so like some people you're gonna sit down and might have had a good conversation, you might have enjoyed your time together, but just like you just didn't like vibe, you know what I mean? And I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that's a super like Gen Z/millennial thing to say, we didn't vibe, but sometimes you don't vibe with people, you know what I mean? And like I said, you have to detach yourself from the potential outcome of a friendship, because if you hold on to it too much, then you can start kind of resenting people and being like, well, that person just thinks they're too good for me. And it's like, no, maybe you just like have different views and values, and it wasn't going to be something that worked out long term. You know what I mean? It's not that big of a deal. Like it's not like, don't worry about it. But the ones that you do have a stronger like connection with, where the energy was good in the room and you talked for before and you talked after, and there were some cool things that maybe you had some similarities, things in common you didn't realize before. um, you just treat it like a friendship. It's like if I'm in town, if I'm visiting somewhere where I've had guests on my show in that area, like I'll just reach out to a few and be like, hey, you want to go grab a beer, you want to go grab a coffee, like let's hang out, let's chat, is there anything I can do for you? or I'll offer to do stuff for them. Or like if they have a podcast, if I'm having a guest on my show that I think they would like, I'm like, hey, you want this interview this person for your show? Like there's always like some sort of value. There's always some sort of exchange. There's always something you can do to maintain some sort of a relationship or friendship with people. If you put in a little bit of effort, and obviously it'll just be easier with the ones that you actually kind of get along with than the ones who maybe, like I said, have different values or something.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and I want to let you know that I've got a free book that you can get if you want to tap into more of these resources, and you can get that for free at kylesbook.com. Back to the podcast.
Right. So you're not trying to force something that's just not natural.
Yeah.
You know, and so, and you
Yeah,
can
that's
tell.
annoying for all parties involved. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you can feel it, right? And you can feel if
Yeah.
somebody wants something, even though they're kind of putting off a facade, like they're trying to help out, but you could kind of tell there's
Right.
something under the surface going on. There's another
Right.
ulterior motive. You can tell. And so you're talking about just, not forcing things, just seeing where it goes organically, naturally, seeing what happens. And there's something spiritual about that too, detaching from the result and
Mhm.
focusing on the experience itself and just letting it unfold. There's a
Yeah.
Taoist concept of Wu Wei that's kind of following along that principle of not forcing. And
Yeah,
there's
of course, man. Yeah,
that,
like
dude.
you can't have that many friends.
Yeah,
You
fair.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah, true.
Like a connection or an acquaintance is different than like a friend of yours. You know what I mean? And so like for me, I've interviewed, I don't know, 600 people at this point. I've been interviewed on 400 or 500 more shows. That's too many friends. Like I can't, they're not like, you know what I mean? Like it's like you can't have that many friendships. There's a
Yeah.
level of depth that is impossible to have with a high volume of people. You know what I mean? So, some people are going to remain connections and acquaintances, and that's totally fine. It's totally okay. Some people are going to take a step deeper. Some people you're going to end up being like really, like you're going to be really tight with. You see them 5-6 times a year. You hang out. You find yourself like there's people that I found myself hanging out with them in Australia. I've found myself hanging out with them in Puerto Rico and Costa Rica. I found myself hanging out with them in Dallas, and this is like, wait a second, like we've hung out together all over the world. Like we've seen each other like 10 times in the last 3 years, but it's always doing cool stuff. We're always having a good time. We're creating memories. Like those people become more like friends than just like, oh, this guy out of my show one time, you know?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love that, dude. It's an interesting way of meeting people. They say if you want to go to therapy, there's another option. You just start a podcast, and it kind of takes care of it kind of takes care of that situation. You can also,
True.
it's like it goes back to the knowledge too. It depends on who you have, and you really you're starting to build things that you don't know what's going to unfold from in the future, which is
Oh,
fascinating.
totally.
What about the business context of it, as opposed to and that's definitely the wrong way of putting it, not opposed to, because they've got the business that will come out of it, and then also the friendships. But do you find that they're always one, or do you find that there is sometimes an ability to have a business opportunity without having that necessary friendship?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
Really?
they're definitely not mutually exclusive. Like you can have one without the other. They can exist together. It just depends on the person and the relationship. Like some people are just they want to get down to business. Like how can we make money together? You know what I mean?
Okay.
And outside of that, they don't really care to go hang out and grab a beer. You know what I mean? It's like how do we make money together? And that's it. It's like cool. I like making money too. Cool. If it works for me, you know what I mean? The best ones are the ones to me. The best ones are the ones that I can do both with, like people that I can hang
Yeah.
out with, watch
Yeah.
a game with, but also like get down to business with. So there's gonna be people who fit in either or bucket or maybe the both bucket in that regard. And then something I was going to say on what you said earlier too is we call it engineering serendipity. Is like
Mm,
serendipity by definition is unengineerable. That's why it's
yeah.
serendipitous. But you can take certain actions that, when compounded over time, tend to provide you with more
Mm,
serendipitous opportunity. And this is one of those things.
yeah.
So it's like if you want to engineer a cluster like of magic serendipity in your life, then this is one of the best ways to do it.
No shit. What about the transition? And you're totally right, dude. That's a cool way of putting it. Serendipity engineered. It's totally paradoxical, but it makes sense when you put it that way. Very
Yeah.
cool. What about the transition between podcast to potential money-making opportunity? Because a lot of
Sure.
folks will look at this as a way to potentially meet leads and make
Sure.
money from it, apart from sponsorships or having a huge audience or whatever. It's an
Yep.
opportunity to meet people and potentially make business deals as a result of it, while also getting the authority and everything else you mentioned in terms of the benefits. But what about that transition piece? How do you move people from podcast to potentially making money together?
So this is kind of what it comes down to, that strategy part that I talked about earlier. When I help people with shows, it's like um, you want to have a guest facing offer and you want to have an audience facing offer. The way that I like the first 6 figures I made in my business was all through me selling on my podcast. I didn't have a large show. I had 300, 400, maybe 500 downloads an episode. But it was such a specific topic that the, 2 or 3 dozen people who really liked my stuff, they were willing to spend money with me to help them do the thing that we were talking about on the show all the time. And so like that was how I funded like the first stage of me doing this whole thing full time, was just having this audience facing offer. I put a call to action in my intro, a call to action in my outro, and that was it. I didn't have sponsors, didn't have anything else. And that was how I first started making my money. Then when you start building the business and you start having like a real offer, it converts to this type of person. My ideal customer profile is this, my ICP, my avatar, whatever you want to call it, looks exactly like this person. If you want to build a show that helps you build better relationships, as well as get you potential clients to talk to, then hands down, the best way to do it is through a guest facing monetization offer, which basically means that you interview people who are in your ideal customer profile. So you make a list of all the people who you think might be able to use your product or service, and then you reach out to those people. You can get them booked on the show. I guarantee you will get way more results asking people to be on your show than you will asking them to jump on a sales call to learn about your products or services. The key difference is you cannot treat the interview like a sales call.
Right.
And some people do that, and it's the worst experience. I've been on interviews like that where it's like, oh, let me interview for my show, and then you go on their show and they're just trying to get you as a client the whole time. It's like, that's just icky. It's gross. It's disingenuous. Like you're doing this to build relationships, and that's the worst way to start a relationship, is with distrust, lies, deceit. You know what I mean? Like it's BS. So don't do that. If you go this route, you got it. Like you have to genuinely be interested in talking to the ICPs that are on your list. And then you have to have genuine, real conversations with them, just like you would with any other podcast guest. The difference is that when I was doing this a good amount, I would bring people on my show, and I would do a call to action read right after I made the introduction. So I would say something like, welcome back to the show. Today we're having Kyle Campbell on the show. I can't wait to get into a cool conversation with Kyle. But first, really quickly, if you are in the AI software space and you've wondered what having a podcast might do for your brand, your business, or anything else, then head over to travischappell.com/coaching. We're taking on a few clients where we actually help you with the entire process, from strategy to launch to production work. We do it all completely for you and with you, so that there's no guesswork. That's travischappell.com/coaching. Kyle, what's up, dude? Thanks so much for being on the show. So I'm like,
you've done that a couple times, eh? It's almost like you've done that once or twice. No shit.
So yeah, I'm going to say it though. Like, you have to be on the call while I say it, right? So that way I know that you're hearing what me and my company do for people and how we solve their problems.
Interesting.
At the end of the conversation, I'm going to mention it one more time. And then once we jump off of the call, like when we're done, when we stop recording on the interview, it's just going to be like, all right, well, cool, man. That was a lot of fun. Thanks for having, like, everything's totally normal. I'm going to breeze through it. I'm not going to bring it up. But if you're talking to that volume of your ICPs and you're building rapport, building real relationships, you're having a 45-minute genuine conversation with them, you're just going to find that by the end of that time together, people are just going to start asking you questions like, hey, I noticed that you said something about podcast. I've actually been thinking about starting a podcast, but I just don't really know what to do. Like, so you guys help people out with that. And then what I'll do there is I'll just say like, yeah, that's absolutely something that we do. However, that's not what these interviews are for. I just wanted to get to know you a little bit better, but why don't we do this? Why don't we set a call on my calendar for Tuesday? And then once we put the call on the calendar, now it's a sales call, and they've agreed to a sales call. And now it's in a context where I can sell them into my products and services, but only if I put the line in the water and they took the line and now they want to know more about what I do. But they have to be the one that's engaging with you. So it builds a lot of relationships with your ideal customers puts you top of mind awareness for that problem if they have that problem to be solved in the future. And then also will convert a certain number of those people into your products and services at the same time while you're building an audience, while you're putting out content, while you're doing all the other things that we talked about that help with, that are reasons why you should have the show to begin with. So yeah, that's kind of the quick and dirty on, like, if you want to start a show that actually generates revenue and brings in more clients for your business, that's how I'd recommend doing it.
I
Like I
love
said,
that.
you just got to be genuine, and you can't try to sell people on the interview. It's like,
detach from the result. Right.
yeah, it's so transparent, like it's so gross.
Yeah.
Just like, do the interview. If they want more information, they'll ask you. You know what I mean? Like, other than that, no worries. Maybe throw it, like, if you want to do more things, it's like, okay, throw a monthly meetup, throw a quarterly event and invite all of your podcast guests. And at that event, have your company be the sponsor of the event. You know what I mean? Like, you can find ways to put your message in front of people. And if they have that problem, you will be top of mind to solve it for them. But it's definitely more of a relationship building tool than it is like a lead gen sales tool, like something else might be.
I love it because it's got so much leverage, man. You're talking about it, that's such a clever way of doing that, to explain to the person that you're interviewing, the potential client, the potential friend, potential JV partner, whatever it might be. You're explaining to them what you do while also explaining it to the audience. That's a genius
Yes.
little hack there to be able to help people be able to make that transition smoother. And
Yeah,
there's
we call it the Ninja CTA, bro. It's the Ninja CTA because it's like it's a call to action to your audience, but it's really you're speaking directly to the person that's on the other end of the Zoom call or whatever.
That's so cool. Oh man, I love that. What about finding the people? Finding the people to interview, and then what's your outreach process look like? We can get into some of my AI a little bit if you want to explore the process we're using, but curious how you guys, for clients, whatever, how do you find people, and then how do you go about getting them on the show?
Yeah, so for me in particular, I don't do that like guest facing monetization anymore. I just am like trying to create better, cooler content. So for me, it's just a matter of like following creators and comedians and athletes and entrepreneurs that I like. And then I just do, like today, I spent an hour or two just doing reach outs. So when I do reach outs, like I'll go do like Instagram DMs, cold emails. But then I'll also ask for introductions from people that I know I have mutual friendships with, and things like that. So it looks a little bit different for me now. It's like less strategic for like biz dev purposes. It's more just like, am I curious about talking to this person about XYZ? If yes, then I'm going to reach out and see if they'll come on the show. It's a lot more difficult this way because my ICP doesn't have like a massive following on Instagram. So like when I used to just reach out to people, it would, I'd have a pretty high success rate, especially when they could come on my show and like put their name next to all the other guests that I've had. So it was a little bit easier like when I was doing it that way. But that's actually why I only do one interview a week now instead of three, because they're just a little bit more difficult to book.
Yeah, well, that'll do that, right? I mean, I do 3 a day, which is like, because that most of my business is automated, so I don't have to. It's just I run the AI. It's all good to go. So I got lots of time on my hands to talk
That's
with
great, dude.
people. Yeah, it's so cool, dude. What I need is to really sort out the follow-up process after connecting and talking with somebody. So that's why I asked about that. Not
Where are you based?
I'm in Quebec, Canada, so it's
Okay.
getting a little warmer out. But yeah, why do you ask?
Yeah. I was just like the meetups and events thing is something that always worked really well for us when we were doing that stuff. I don't know how many like local people or people in Canada that you interview on your show or that you'd be able to get out to an event. But maybe even doing like a group chat or like I'm in a group chat or two that podcast hosts have done where they just put everybody they interview into a group chat. They obviously get permission, but it's one of those like value add pieces where like you're always on people's minds. You know what I mean? If it's like a WhatsApp group chat or a Facebook group or something, just throw a bunch of people in there that might have interest in connecting with each other. They maybe have business to go around, and you can just throw them all in a group and connect them together. I try to think of ways that are like,
that's interesting.
I stay in touch with these people without being the one staying in touch with them. Like if you invite a bunch of people to an event, it's like, oh, the mutual connection is Travis. So you just pop up in all the conversations naturally, without being like in their face about following up with them about XYZ. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Because that's what you want to avoid. And people, that's why I'm asking about the transition specifically, because if you just go into it like, okay, how can I sort of work out some sort of a deal? It's, it comes off like somebody tried to do that to me the other day. We got on a podcast, had an interesting conversation, got off, and he was like, immediately, okay, so how we're gonna promote my stuff to your list, kind of a vibe.
Yeah.
I'm like, what,
Yeah.
man? Like, I thought we got on well, but I don't know you, dude. Like,
Totally. Yeah. Well, it's
we're
like
gonna
the
move a
dude who's
little bit
trying to
slower.
have sex on the first date. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's
No
like
kidding.
it's the
Yeah.
same. It's the same idea. It's like you're trying to force your product down my list. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
chill out, bro. We
Yeah.
just met. You know
Yeah,
what I
for
mean?
real.
Like, that's the same guy that meets the girl at the bar and tries to hook up with her without ever going on a date. You know what I mean? It's like, well, are you gonna have success doing that? Yeah, it's a numbers game, but also like fast forward in 5 years, you're not going to have any real relationships. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Either
man.
one of them.
No
So,
kidding.
which one do you want?
And then you end up unfulfilled and shit, man.
That's
I did
right.
that a couple of years ago. I went on a Tinder spree, man. It was fun, but at the same time, it was like unfulfilling, It didn't take long for that to get pretty tiresome. And the same is
Yeah. Well, you always gotta
after
you always
that.
gotta get back on the wheel. You know what I mean? Like you all
Yeah,
like, and
and
that's how it
there's
is in business. It's like, yeah, you can burn and turn. Yeah, that's a strategy, and yeah, it does work because it's a numbers game. But if you treat people like numbers, then that's how your relationships will be reflected. Because people are numbers. People are
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Treat people like people. You fast forward in 10 years, and you have this like community
Mm,
of givers, of
right.
people who love you for you, who know you're generous, who are also generous, and they all want to help give and like learn. Like it's kind of the same concept of building an audience. You know what I mean? It's like if you want to
Yeah,
fast forward in 10
right.
years, like do you really want to be like trying to get another $10,000 a month for your insurance business at the local, chamber meetup because like all you've done the whole time is just go to that meetup every month, throw business cards at people's faces, vomit
Yeah.
elevator pitches, move on, don't care about people. It's like that's a hamster wheel. You always got to get back on. That's the problem. The problem is that it works short
Ah,
term.
short
So
term.
people
Yeah.
think that it's awesome. They're like, oh, I made $8,000 this month. And it's like, yeah, but in 20 years, you'll make $8,000 this month. You know what I'm saying? Like it'll
That's
be
a
the
problem,
same,
right? Yeah.
and it'll be the same work you got to put in 20. Like I'm not trying to be on this hustle in 20 years. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's like that. That's the difference between me and you. You know what I mean? So, yeah, you got to look at it relationally. You got to think long term.
What about the podcast or the group chat idea? There's something interesting about that because you're providing value and it's a genuine value add without having to control or convince anybody to do anything. It's just, hey, I got this
Mm-hmm.
group. I'd love for you to be a part of it for no charge, nothing like that. Just
Mm-hmm.
come hang out. How would you go about structuring something like that? Is this like because is this something that you recommend to clients who pay you to start and help them start podcasts to be able to?
So I've recommended it more recently because I've seen a couple people do it and do it well. I've never done it personally because it's just that I found like the more high profile people you get, the less willing they are to be a part of
Yeah,
the chat.
fair. Yeah.
And then if you have some people that don't understand that dynamic, then they abuse it, and then all of a sudden, you lose that relationship capital with the other people. But
Mm,
if you structure it in a good way and you have a couple of rules that are involved in there, and then you're an active moderator, like that's the thing is like you just got to make sure that like, oh, this person's just spamming the group. It's like, look, man, like we don't allow that in the group. You know what I mean? And make sure you're clear about that. But when you set it up, like do something that people can mute notifications. It's like you don't want it to be in their like actual text messages because that just gets annoying. But yeah, like a WhatsApp group or something, because I'm in a couple WhatsApp group chats that I'm in, but I keep notifications muted. I go in there once in a while, check to see if I can help anybody out. I put something in there once in a while, and they're good. They're every time I jump in there and see it, it's like it makes me think of the host. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of the idea. Is like you want to again move yourself up to top of mind awareness, move yourself up to top of mind awareness. In some of these, and some of those ways can be really effective. And a group chat can be a really great virtual way to make sure that you're always staying in touch with a bunch of people. And then if you are traveling or whatever, and you want to meet up with people, it's kind of cool to be like, hey, anybody in LA this weekend? I'll be there for 3 days. Let's go hang out, or let's go watch a show, or let's go get some coffee, or whatever. You know what I mean? So it can be a really cool, effective tool.
I love that, man. It's a sweet idea. Lots of leverage there for sure. But what about the actual implementation of it? How would you go about facilitating conversations over time so that it's not just a stagnant pool of people that's kind of just, there. People are coming in, but nobody's vibing in it. How do you get people to interact?
Yeah, well, first off, you don't want to start with like 3 people. You want to like
Fair.
if you're going
Yeah,
to
yeah,
start it,
yeah.
start off with 25 people or 30 people or whatever.
Yeah.
Like I said, you want to be pretty clear about what the rules are at the very beginning. Like, hey, don't post promotion links in here. This is not for spamming your product or whatever. You know what I mean? So you want to like be pretty clear about how to use the group. But other than that, it's really up to you. It's really like, how do you want to moderate the group? Do you want to provide topics for discussion? Do you want it just to be like totally informal and people can talk whenever they want to talk and not talk if they don't want to talk, and mute if they want to mute or whatever? Like really, that's up to you as the moderator and how you want to structure the group of the community. Just think about it in a way that you would want it to be done, and probably if that's the way you would want it to be done, there's probably a lot of people out there who would appreciate it.
I bet you're right, dude. For real. It's a good way of keeping in touch with people. I love that. I know you got to
Especially if you're interviewing as many as you are.
Oh, yeah, especially, right? Yeah, because that adds to that. You don't want to do it when you're first starting out, but you can reach back to the folks you've interviewed and be like, "Hey, I'm starting this group." And dude, I know you got to run. We're out of time here, but it's fascinating talking with you, man. I wish we had more time to shoot the shit on this, because you got all kinds of good wisdom and nuggets to share in terms of starting a podcast and monetizing it in unique ways, whether it be the direct from the viewers, building an audience, or the relationship capital that you're building over time. It's
Yeah, dude.
fascinating what you do, dude. Anything else you want to add before we kick this off?
That's it, man. Just, encourage everybody listening, like, think long term. Do whatever you're going to do, think long term. If it's a podcast, if it's an event, if it's an insurance business, whatever you're thinking, like, think long term. Don't think about how it's going to work today. Think about how it's going to work in 5 years from now. And that might inform your actions today a little bit differently.
Damn, dude, there's some wisdom there for sure. All right, how do people find you? What's your podcast called, and what are your social handles?
So my podcast is Travis Makes Friends. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm really trying to push people to YouTube, because we got a late start on YouTube and now we're trying to play catch up. Most of our audience is on audio, so we're trying to do a lot more on YouTube. So go to YouTube at Travis Makes Friends on YouTube. And then, Guestio is my company name. If you want to get booked on shows, if you want guests booked on your show, guestio.com, guest, like be my guest, guestio.com is the website. You can go check it out. We have a concierge service that's done for you, and we have a software that's do it yourself. So there's a little bit of flexibility there depending on budget and those types of things. So yeah, guestio.com if you want to check that out. And Travis Makes Friends everywhere you can find podcasts.
Perfect. Thanks, Travis. Appreciate you, man.
All right, dude. Thanks, Kyle.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. And if you want to get a free copy of my book, go to kylesbook.com and you can get a copy there. I'll talk with you soon.